So for those of you who don't know, we are guiding our preaching based on a theme-based ministry program, which means that from September until May, we select themes and wrap our sermons and our religious education programming around those themes. And this month's theme is A+. All right, so this month's theme is hope, which we heard Barlin introduce last week, and he did a children's story. It's fabulous. So this week I continue with hope. And this morning we are going to talk about how hope works. How hope works in our lives, how hope works to perpetuate more hope. So to hope is to wish for a specific outcome. To hope is to hold on to an expectation. Now, we have been taught that this is not a good idea. Or at least, maybe I should say I. I'll say I until I hear you talk back. I have been taught that this is not a good idea. Because we've learned that hoping is fraught with peril. We've been told enough times that we need to let go of outcomes and to not risk voicing specifics of our desires, because we might get disappointed. Someone told me this week, I have been so disappointed so many times that I have just learned to lower my expectations. All the way lower. I don't want to live like that. I don't know about you, but I don't want to live like that. And I get it, though. I get it if you've been hurt a whole lot about having hopes. And I understand how the pain of disappointment can lead some people to just thicken their skin, to get tough rather than strong. Thickening their skin, causing them to choose fewer and fewer occasions where they might risk being vulnerable, losing the opportunity to grow stronger, because we grow stronger by getting vulnerable. And it takes hope, naming those specific outcomes. We're vulnerable in that time. And so with every new layer of getting thicker and thicker skin, if we're not making those choices, if we're choosing not to be hopeful, we're losing hope every time we make that decision. Now, in Paul Loeb's book, I don't know if you know Paul Loeb, he's an activist and a teacher, an author. In his book, Soul of a Citizen, he focuses on those who hope for specific outcomes and their struggles to see that change happen. And in this book, I learned about a woman named Virginia Ramirez, who went from barely being able to read or write to leading change in the U.S. Senate. He says, too many of us hold back from community involvement because we think we don't know enough to act on our beliefs. Or we don't have the standing or the confidence to take a public stand. When we see a woman, he says, who begins with no money, no power, no education, and no status in the community, and then she becomes a powerful voice for change, it inspires us all, or it should, to hope and to work for the future that we dream of. So Virginia Ramirez of San Antonio, Texas, could easily have lived out her days without ever discovering her ability to speak. She left school after 8th grade to get married after the 8th grade. She said, that was what most Hispanic women in my generation did. My husband, who drives a taxi cab, went to work after the 6th grade. And although dropping out seemed normal at the time, she felt frustrated when she couldn't help her 5 children with their homework. When Virginia was 45, she realized that this neighbor that she had, an elderly woman, was getting sick around the same time every winter. This neighbor was a widow who had lived in a house that was next door, and it was so dilapidated that it couldn't even retain the heat. She was one of those people, said Virginia, who always paid her taxes on time, faithfully making out her little money orders. But she couldn't afford to repair her house. And everyone around her was just as poor. So Virginia went with her to the city agencies trying to find help for her. They kept sending us from place to place, she said, from department to department, and finally, her neighbor died of pneumonia. The paramedics told Virginia that she'd never have died if her house hadn't been so freezing cold. Virginia said, "I had never been so angry in my life. This woman had done everything she was supposed to do, and now she was dead because no one could help fix her home." So it was with some hesitation that she attended a meeting at her church, and at that meeting, Virginia raised her hand and said, "I have a problem. This neighbor lady friend of mine died because it was so cold and they didn't fix her house, and I want to do something about it." And so a few days later, one of the people who'd organized this meeting knocked on Virginia's door and asked her to tell them why she was so angry. Well, this opened some floodgates. Virginia was angry, she said, because she'd tried to help that old lady and failed. She was upset because her kids weren't getting properly educated in school, because she'd given up on her own education and her own dreams. She was angry because she had to watch her father, whom she adored, be humiliated again and again by police and store owners when they drove from state to state to pick crops. No one seemed to care, she said, about her community. Now, that volunteer, who was from a community organizing group, didn't advise Virginia to do anything in particular. She just asked if they could talk again. And when she returned, she suggested that Virginia hold a house meeting to see if her neighbors had similar concerns. 9 people came to that first meeting. Virginia had never conducted a meeting before, and her legs shook so much she almost fell over trying to open the door. But gradually, people began to talk all of their problems and experiences. Their neighborhood had been thrown together at the cheapest possible cost, built for workers in a now closed slaughterhouse nearby. The neighborhood lacked sidewalks and adequate sewers. Most of the houses were crumbling, and as she listened, Virginia realized that this was about the future of her community. This was not just about her and not just about her neighbor. So Virginia and the other community organizing members painstakingly researched documents at City Hall, discovering that the city had built a street in a more affluent area with the money that was earmarked to repair their barrio homes. And so Virginia's next step, testifying before city council, felt terrifying. But she walked up to the podium to protest the diversion of funds, and she was so nervous she forgot what she was going to say. She said, "I didn't remember my speech. I barely remembered my own name. And then I turned around and I saw all of those people who'd come with me. And I realized that I was just telling the story of our community. And so I told it, and we got our money back." Virginia's journey into public life was not easy. She often prayed over whether or not her newfound path was right, asking God for guidance, like, what am I doing with these crazy people and where is it going to lead? I know you've never prayed that prayer. Yet her involvement also strengthened her faith, giving her new meaning to biblical lessons that had once just seemed remote and abstract. Suddenly, she said, I was reading these stories about injustice from thousands of years ago, and it seemed like they were talking about today, about me, about San Antonio. During her more than 20 years with this organization, over the time, she's moved up in the organization. First, she was training people in her parish, and then working with other local churches to develop their members' leadership skills as well. She focused particularly on women like herself, using her own unexpected journey as an example. She has taught them to find her own voice, for them to find their own voice, and to speak out for their communities, despite any doubts or hesitations that they might have. But it was when Virginia went to Washington, D.C., that she realized how far she'd come. She went to testify before a U.S. Senate committee on an innovative job training program that she and another community organizing members had helped to develop. Now, I don't know about you, but when we talk about teams, I want Virginia on my team. I want people like Virginia on my team. Too often, I encounter those in the world so blinded by cynicism and excuses, so blinded that they retreat into their own world and don't interact and don't risk. And what they do is actually make space for injustice to prevail. They have been fooled into believing that their hopes don't matter. Now, on this topic of cynicism, activist, professor, and author of 2 must-read books, Paul Loeb, he wrote, "Cynicism wasn't always so disempowering. You see, the first cynics, the root of that word, cynics, actually comes from a set of ancient Greek philosophers. Most notably of them was Diogenes, who caustically denounced the established culture of their time." Now, that's okay, right? Monk-like ascetics who preached simplicity, self-discipline, self-sufficiency. They offered a moral alternative to empty materialism, legalism, and religious hypocrisy that had come to dominate Greek society. Back then, to be a cynic meant to stand up for one's convictions, but it doesn't anymore. In our time, cynicism comes in the guise of this all-knowing attitude that working for a larger common good is actually the vocation of the terminally innocent, leaving no likely outcome except heartbreak. But that is not true. Cynicism unites people in their judgment of those who are hopeful. Cynicism unites people in their judgment of those who are hopeful by identifying them as naive or unrealistic or even ignorant. Cynicism connects people to one another, sure it does, in their desperate attempt to avoid heartbreak, to build up that tough skin. But without the risk of heartbreak, let me ask you, what abides? Not hope, not love, and not faith. In order to have the opportunity to experience and to know faith, hope, and love, we have to risk the breaking of our own hearts. Let me say that again, because it is so true. In order for us to have the opportunity to experience and to know faith and hope and love, we must risk the breaking of our own hearts. Because being faithful and being hopeful and being full of love requires us to be vulnerable. In the Christian scriptures in Hebrews chapter 1, it's written, "Hold fast to thy confession of hope." Hold fast to thy confession of hope. It is a confession, your hope. It is a confession of what is scrawled across your heart. See, hope is to name what we desire, to speak the vision of our hearts into the world. And that is very risky. Because, see, there's this possibility that that outcome that we desire will not be manifested. Now, I'm doing some work right now. I see Catherine Mitchell in the audience. Hi, darling. I'm doing some work with North Tulsa Development Council, and she's on there with me. And we are risking. We're doing what I think that some people think will never be done, aren't we? We are working to invest our time and collective knowledge and energy with a group of, how many of us are there? 15? 20? 20. 20 professionals around the city who are investing in North Tulsa. You should see this conversation already. We've only been doing this for 3 months now, 4 months now. And I'm investing in North Tulsa. Oh, no, that's going to stay the same. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. What are you going to do there? Right now we've got this amazing project where we're trying to turn this economic development that they are proposing that is going to be north of the shopping center that's already there at Pine and Peoria. We are investing right now in trying to create this economic development to be more than just a mall, more than just a strip mall, but a community center that has the people's involvement, that is engaging the community as they are deciding who is going to go into those stores, that is looking at the retirement home that will be behind it to see whether or not those folks will be able to use that new facility, that will have a gathering space that will be beautiful and well lit and bring jobs to that part of town. All right? But it is going to take a lot of work. Because I tell you what, I envision myself knocking on, I don't know if you envision yourself do this, we're part of the community buy-in part, and I see myself knocking on doors going, oh, please have hope, please. Knock, knock, knock. I promise you we won't thwart you this time. Knock, knock, knock. I promise you we're really invested this time. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? Can you imagine them trying to be hopeful with me? I'm serious. How can they be hopeful with this crazy white woman standing in front of them going, I want to invest in North Tulsa? Right? Right. So it is going to take some work to convince people that God is good. It is going to take some work to be able to convince folks that I am taking a risk too, right? That the people who are on this committee are taking a risk too, and that we have a hope. And that hope is that North Tulsa will no longer be North Tulsa, but that this will be Tulsa, right? That this will all be Tulsa. And that, my friends, is the beginning of redemption that this city desperately needs. Desperately needs. So where was I? Yes. If we don't know and name what we want, we have no vision of the world as it could be, then we are trapped either in the world as it is, or we are trapped in some accidental future that we passively help create. All right? All right? If we don't know and name what we want, if we have no vision of the world as it could become, then we are trapped either in the world as it is, stuck in the way it is right now, or in some accidental future that we passively helped to create. Are you with me? See, I want to be on the team of people who actively participate in manifesting their future, who don't just sit by and let it happen, right? I want to be on the team of people who take the gifts that God has given them and use them. I want to be, thank you, because I do. I want to be on a team of people who bear their scars for others to see because they know that it will give them the fuel to further on. Because it is in our vulnerability, it is in our speaking aloud of that vision, of those hopes, of the world as it could be, that we are most inspired to hope despite the outcome. And dare I say, why, yes, I do dare say, dare I say that the role of the church is, in fact, to help you seek what is written on the scars of your heart. The role of the church is to help you seek what is written on the scars of your heart. It is the role of the church to help you find the courage and the strength to name those scars and the wounds behind them, because hearing that others have walked through the valley and come out on the other side in and of itself offers hope to those who still need light to find their way. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? And it is the role of the church to encourage you to name the change that you want to see in the world. Not just hope for goody-goody, but get out there and say, I want to see this happen, right? It is the role of the church to encourage you to name that vision of a promised land and to support you in finding a way to create it. You see, in my time at All Souls, I have met many manifestations of hope walking through our hallways and sitting in our pews. Now, there are hundreds of volunteers that keep our children's and youth program running and offer a message of hope and inclusion in Tulsa that is not offered anywhere else. There are those who volunteer to greet and to welcome and to usher, who sing and play music, who bring their talents to help this church run smoothly. There are many volunteers who show up at our adopted schools, who are reading buddies, who spend one-on-one time investing in a child's future, often the most consistent relationship in that child's life. And there are those who are reaching out to the Laura Dester Shelter to teach women to read, and those who assist with all the amazing programming that we have, which you can find on the back of your order of service if you want to learn more about it. For me personally, hope in this church has come in the form of cards and kind words and real moments of presence showing up for me when my father died recently. But it is from our volunteers in this church and our volunteers that go out into the community that I have seen hope work. For the work of hope, I will tell you, perpetuates more work of hope. The work of the church, you see, is about the transformation of lives and the transformation of society. And so by bonding together in our efforts, despite the odds, not just because we have a common vision, not just because we're united in a free faith in what is good and just and true, but because we have hopes, specific hopes. And when they don't happen, it will break our heart. And when they do happen, we will celebrate together. And if they don't happen, we will keep working. We will get up every single day and do it again. Hopes that the children of Tulsa will not go to bed or to school hungry. Hopes about the improvement of our educational system, or the healthcare system, or the justice system, or government. There's a system in common here, and I don't have a thing against systems. You need to know that. I don't have a thing against systems. Matter of fact, I think that one of the reasons why we gather together is to become a system that can speak to other systems. But we unite in our faith. We unite in our hopes as individuals, as a community, and as an organization so that we can have a voice in that conversation. But the voice of our faith is not a cynical one. It is your voice, and it is mine. It is the voice of reason, and it is the voice of hope. And so it is that in church, we gather to tell stories of those who have hoped beyond disappointment. We gather together to tell stories of those who hope in the face of disaster, in the face of disease, in the face of death. We gather in church to tell stories about those who hope in the face of affliction, of aversion, and apathy. We gather to tell their stories so that we might be inspired to do the same. Now, one of those stories you all know well, and that is Jesus. And that is not the one I'm telling today. Sonia Tinsley refers to these people, those always telling stories of faith being rewarded. Those who tell the stories of things being different, of how their own lives have changed. People who will give you reasons why you shouldn't give up. Testimonials why we've yet to see our full potential as a species and why we must try and try and try again. Because we believe we are partners in God's creation and that change is really possible. So Jesus was like that. But the hope of the world mostly comes in the form of everyday folk doing everyday tasks. And it comes from some extraordinary folks doing some extraordinary tasks, because if you look at how difficult it is sometimes to just get up and put your shoes on, just being present is an extraordinary task. But I'd like to tell you about a few of these folks that inspire me in our congregation. Because of my late inclusion of these stories, y'all know I have a bad habit of writing early Sunday morning. Because of my late inclusion of these stories, I didn't have time to seek their permission to include them, but actually I think it works out better, because the names are not real, but by their works they shall be known. See, hope for me has taken the form of Linda, who is a businesswoman by day, a professional. She's a member of our Oklahoma Religious Coalition for Reproductive Rights, and she shows up regularly on Saturday mornings in order to escort women from their cars to the front door of reproductive services. And these are women that she does not know. And even though she's not certain how she would handle an unwanted pregnancy or a pregnancy complication, she believes that these women deserve dignity and respect. And so she greets them with a smile and does her best to shield them from the protesters condemning her and her decision. And then there's John. John is retired, and he quit his job as a graphic designer of a major company in town in order to fulfill his dream of making a difference in our schools as an 8th grade science teacher, trying as hard as he can to bolster the aspirations of our underprivileged youth. There's Ed, who since 1993 has spent most of his Wednesdays and Saturdays working for our housing outreach program. Who would have fixed that lady's house in San Antonio if they'd have been here? Renovating houses in low-income areas in Tulsa. He doesn't take compliments well. He doesn't want to be thanked. He just believes that if he can do something to help, then he should. And he has a hope that everyone will have a roof over their head that does not leak. And meanwhile, people's homes and lives are bettered by his work. There's Lewis. He's been an executive director of a nonprofit helping the homeless in Tulsa, and he gives his time and his talent on our board of trustees to help us guide our executive decisions and run the business of the church. There's Mary. She just called me this week to see how she could include the church in her estate. She says that she does not have much, but she wants whatever she has magnified by the good deeds of this church and to benefit the children of our membership. And Annie, who volunteers at every memorial service, making sandwiches and these amazing coconut cookies, which I know about, maybe too well, and ushering and pouring coffee for the grieving families among us. And all of those who give their time and talent and treasure in the church and the community, displaying their hope and vision of a changed world. And just by showing up, give hope to other people. I want you to think about what your hope is of a changed world. What do you want to see change? Because Virginia did it with no power and no education and no status. What could you do this week to take one step in that direction and be someone else's hope? Or maybe it's just listening to someone be cynical and say, that's not how I see the world. Historian and activist and contributor to Paul Loeb's collection of writings, Howard Zinn, who is a beloved man. If you haven't read A People's History of the United States of America, that should be obligatory reading for being a citizen of this country, in my opinion. It is an amazing book that will talk to you about how it is people who have made this country what it is today. Individual people and groups of inspired people. But Howard Zinn wrote, "To be hopeful in bad times is not just foolishly romantic. It is based on the fact that human history is a history not only of cruelty, which it is, but it is also a history of compassion and sacrifice, of courage and kindness. And what we choose to emphasize in this complex history will determine our whole lives. Whether or not we emphasize the cruelty or the compassion and the sacrifice, the courage and the kindness will determine our lives," he says. So if we see only the worst, it destroys our capacity to do something. If we remember those times and places, and there are so many where people have behaved magnificently, it'll give us energy to act. And at least the possibility of sending this spinning top of a world into a different direction. He says, and if we do act, in however small of a way, we don't have to wait for some grand utopian future. The future is an infinite succession of presents. And to live now, as we think human beings should live, in defiance of all that is bad around us, is itself a marvelous victory. Just to live and be hopeful and recognize the difficulty, the struggle, the suffering in this world is in itself a marvelous victory. So choose your team wisely. Surround yourself with hopeful people whenever you can. Hopeful people who do the work, who don't let the future come by passively. Now, on this third Sunday of Advent, we are reminded to prepare ourselves, to prepare ourselves because something is coming. For in the midst of darkness, in the midst of darkness, in the midst of winter, the light has already come. The light has come to guide us to hope. And you are surrounded, so look around. You are surrounded by that light right now. May it guide you to hope. Amen.